So we've got dueling super chats regarding CFP expansion. You knew we had to talk about it at some point tonight. We'll probably do a standalone video on this, but Darius asked us to talk about it. Thank you for the super chat. And then Stephen Light kind of let him know that we hate it more than words can describe. But we're going to give you some words to describe how much we hate it. But before we talk about what we hate about it, Josh, I'm going to force you, because we talked about it yesterday a little bit. I'm going to force you to tell me some things that you actually like about the proposed playoff expansion.
Some things I actually like about it. I think the biggest thing that I like about the playoff expansion is the fact that there's really two prongs that I do like. One, there is the reality that a lot of New Year's Six Bowls had become just done out of the gate, right? Oklahoma fans don't want to hear it. You didn't play Florida after 2020. You played Florida's third string. You know, I counted it up. There were like three third string players on defense. The majority of the defense was second or third string players. They didn't play a single starting skill position player from Florida other than the quarterback. And that includes Kyle Pitts and a receiver, Kadarius Toney, turns out he's pretty good. So it was a big deal that those guys weren't in that game. It wasn't shocking that they destroyed Florida, but it also meant the sort of culmination for that whole season was a just total loss. And it was a shame for Florida fans. It was a shame, I think, for Oklahoma fans because they didn't get to see, they have to live with the whole, yes, I know we've always said they won that game fair and square, but you didn't really get to evaluate the team the way you would have liked at the end of the year, and certainly for the national college football landscape. So I do think the playoff is good from the respect that it's probably going to cause people to actually play in the postseason. The other thing I will say, there is a little bit of merit to the argument that teams making it into the playoff keeps them sort of relevant, right? Like if you're in the Pac-12 and you've lost 2 games, but the Pac-12 gets an automatic qualifier slot, at least the teams competing for the Pac-12 title are going to stay interested through the end of the year because they know that somebody is going to go to the playoff. And maybe fans will watch because they think they'll get a playoff slot. Now, all that said, I think that's going to be really interesting for probably about 3 years until people realize the way the first round of the playoffs is going to go on a continual basis. But, I think we screwed a lot of stuff up with the playoffs and being accepting of opt-outs and all that kind of stuff. And maybe this sort of buys us a few more years of good football.
Darius Williams with another super chat said Pac-12 can't handle SEC East teams, but wants a shot in the playoffs. And that's kind of what we've said in the past. Like 2018, Washington loses 3 games, wins the Pac-12. Who did they play in their opener? The 6th best team in the SEC in Auburn, a team that Alabama beat by, I think, 32 points or something like that. Georgia crushed them too. That's the kind of thing that, like, we don't need to see that game. And even if you can kind of circle the wagons and prepare for a month and beat a really good team, you're not going to beat 3 in a row, for starters. And second off, you didn't earn the right to be on the field with that team. Last year, the G5 auto qualifier, so the 6th team, would have been Louisiana. Because if you think about it, everybody's like, oh, well, now we're going to get UCF in there. Now we're going to get Memphis in there. Now we're going to get, I think it's 2015 Houston. They're going to be in the playoffs. No, because now they're in the Big 12 or the Pac-12. When we do realignment, what's good G5s now are going to be P5 teams, which also waters down the concept of P5. That's another story. But what you were left with in the playoffs last year would have been a Louisiana team that lost to 5-7 Texas, 38-18. Playing a Bama or Georgia or whatever. And the 12th ranked team in the country was Pitt. Pitt lost to Western Michigan, and they lost to a team that Alabama beat by 30 points in Miami. That team does not deserve to be on the playing field with Georgia or Alabama or whatever. We saw what Michigan was doing to teams last year and then what Georgia did to them. It's not fair that Georgia has to endure injuries in an opening round game against a team that lost to Western Michigan. I'm sorry. So now Pitt loses to Western Michigan, and they're like, doesn't matter. We can keep playing. Oh, lost to Miami. Doesn't matter. As long as we win our crappy conference, because Clemson's down this year, then we'll be in the playoffs. And that's all we're playing for, is a shot at the playoffs, because nothing else matters anymore. That's really disappointing.
Yeah, and we've done a couple breakdowns on it, right? Talking about the reality of how this AQ format would work out. Look, let me be clear. I think 12 is a better number than 8 because I'd rather see 5 play 12, 6 play 11, etc., than 1 play 8. That most years 1, 2, 3 versus 8, 7, 6 are major mismatches, excepting the times when you have like a 2-loss Ohio State or Alabama or somebody that's floating in that realm. But the problem is the automatic qualifier, format that they're using. Having 6 automatic qualifiers, and especially saying the top 4 teams have to be conference champions, is not good in this realignment format, right? Oklahoma and Texas are going to be in the SEC. USC and Cal are going to be in the Big Ten. So, the SEC and the Big Ten are only ever allowed to have 2 of the 4. One thing I haven't had answered yet is if Notre Dame is allowed to be one of the 4, which if they are, I think that's absolutely freaking absurd that, an 11-1 SEC team, or like last year's 12-1 Georgia, can't be number 3, but Notre Dame can without having to play in a conference championship. Hopefully they're just required to have an at-large bid. But yeah, it's really bad. I think last year, right? I think I said it was, if you look at where everybody's going to be post alignment, I think it was like Utah that would end up being the number 4 seed, who is the number 6 or number 7 overall team. And then because you have all these automatic qualifiers, again, you think in a post realignment context, Cincinnati and Baylor are going to be in the same conference. So only one of them gets an AQ slot, and you've got to have 6 AQs. So the last AQ goes every year. It's going to go to a G5 team. There's only 5 P5. So you have to have at least one G5. But BYU, Cincinnati, UCF, Houston are not G5s. So last year, the best team was Fresno State. Like a lot of other years, it's going to be Air Force or Memphis. And they're going to be like 2 or 3 lost G5s that maybe lost by like 4 touchdowns. I think, what was the year? 2019, right? Cincinnati, I think they ended the year the top G5 champion. And they lost to Ohio State in regular season. Memphis.
Cincinnati lost the last game of the year, regular season game, to Memphis by like 4 or 5, and then lost the conference championship game to Memphis by 4 or 5. And that's the team that Ohio State beat 42-0, and it could have been 70-0.
Yeah, I mean that.
And that Memphis team, by the way, got destroyed by Penn State in their bowl game.
The justification there and this is because it's presidents making this formula, right? So it was decided by the presidents and the commission, and it's going to be handed back to the people that are football people to sort of iron out the exact details. The proposal was given before realignment, right? So it made a lot more sense when BYU and Cincinnati and UCF were G5s. You could kind of stomach it. But without that, now I don't think it makes sense. The idea behind it is that every year the G5 gets included. So the presidents want to make sure we have inclusion. But, if the G5 is actually good enough to make the playoff, they will get in the top 12. It's not that hard to be a top 12 team. It's really not.
Especially as a G5, when you're getting rid of all the good G5s to go into P5. So it's like, oh, you got to win your big game against UAB and Temple, and have a clean record. And then, because we've seen the voters dying to overrank mediocre G5s just because they have a clean record. We've seen that in the past. So you're right. Being top 12 is not that hard.
Right. So Boise State, when they were in their heyday with Kellen Moore, they were consistently a top 10 team at the end of the year. UCF, when they were best season, they were number 8. It's Utah, when they beat Alabama, I think they were number 4 in the country. Mm-hmm. So yeah, if you're a really high level G5, you can make top 12. The problem is so many of these teams that we're naming, UCF and Utah, are not G5s anymore. And it's not because people traded places. It's just the Power 5 expanded basically to absorb the better parts of the G5. And quite frankly, they expanded to absorb most of the G5 that ever has any shot of ever being relevant. So whatever low-level chance you had of a UCF being competitive with like an Alabama, the odds of Air Force and Fresno State being competitive with Georgia and Alabama are beyond remote. So I really don't like a 12-team playoff where one game in the first round. And last year, realize, your highest seed of the first round, your first non-bye team, will always or almost always going to end up being the highest ranked non-conference or non-champion, right? Usually one conference has 2 teams that are highly ranked. one is not a champion, and that's usually higher than whatever the fifth champion is. Last year it'd be Georgia. So Georgia goes into the playoff and effectively plays Fresno State and beats them like 40 to nothing. And because of that, they actually get some advantages the way seeding plays out. It's a crappy format and it's a dumb idea. I'm really, really hoping they scrap a lot of it or at least sort of curtail it because as it's currently set out, I think it's not good. It's going to make the playoff a lot worse than if they just ranked it best to worst, 1 to 12. I still wouldn't love it, but best to worst 1 to 12 would be a heck of a lot better than this AQ hybrid monstrosity
Josh,
that they've created.
Here's the frustrating thing is like, to me, I don't understand why we can't acknowledge reality. Why can't we acknowledge the fact that like a lot of this realignment is going to happen? Like you said, they started thinking through this before all this realignment took place. Why can't we acknowledge the reality that in the coming years, a 9-3 UAB either shouldn't get an AQ or shouldn't be one of the top, ranked whatever, a 3-loss Pac-12 because they won their conference championship should not be ranked ahead of a team. This is what we're going to get, Josh. We're going to get these like guaranteed home field advantage, whatever 3-loss Pac-12 champion. We're going to get them as a higher seed being a 2 or 3 touchdown underdog to the second best team in the Big Ten East. That's what we're going to get. Like,
yeah,
it's just ridiculous.
Yeah, it I was talking about last year, right? That you talk alignment or post alignment. If you play where the teams were at, I think it was Cincinnati and Baylor that get the last 2 slots. Otherwise, it ends up with Cincinnati and Utah. It's not really great that the 4th champion always gets a bye because there have been years, I think, was it 2018 we were processing, right? Washington is an automatic qualifier, and they were a 3-loss team that lost to Auburn in the opener, and Auburn was like, weren't they like a 5-loss team that year? They weren't particularly good.
They were the 6th best team in the SEC, and Alabama beat them, I think, like 52-20, something like that.
It's not a great thing. And there have been many, many years where the 4th best P5 champion is not someone that can stay on the field with a lot of other teams.
Well, that's why they didn't get in the playoffs, right? Like that's why the 4th best team in the champion many years hasn't made it to the playoffs because the committee's like, look, Utah, you lost to San Diego State and BYU. You're not beating Georgia. So let's put Georgia in.
Yeah, it's just not good. And I think everybody's thought process is, oh, there's more football, there'll be more good football because good teams play competitive games. And they're not understanding that the majority of games played between numbers 1, 2, 3, and 4. And I mean into the season. I don't mean Michigan at the start of 2007 because the team that lost to App State beginning of 2007, everything can happen. They lost 35-7 to Oregon the next week. They ended up being a 4-loss team, if I remember right. So, yeah, sometimes teams are way overranked early in the year, and sometimes beginning of the year, good teams don't play well, right? Alabama losing to Texas A&M last year, who, by the way, ended up being a pretty good team. They're just kind of ships crossing in the night to a certain extent. No, when you're talking end of the season, top teams, they're usually in rare form, and all that talent that Ohio State and Georgia and Alabama and LSU amasses really starts to coalesce, and they become, I won't say unbeatable, but it's something kind of close to it a lot of times. And so, yeah, maybe you get an upset, but I think I was looking at the FEI win probabilities of different rankings, and Oregon's win probability against Georgia in FEI, and this was just preseason projection, so it's obviously pretty loose, and frankly that means it's giving them a higher chance because it doesn't know Georgia. It was still 7%, and that was FEI number, I think it was number 3 versus number 11. They had a 7% chance of winning, and I looked at historically where March Madness would be, and that is about the average win percentage of a 6.3% is a 15 seed in March Madness against a 2 seed. So, you're basically every playoff game is going to be something like a 14 through a 16 seed. It's, people think of it like all these 12 seeds that get upset, and everywhere time you have a 16 seed that upsets a 1 seed. It's just not going to happen. I mean, you're going to have one of those upsets like once every 4 or 5 years, and the rest of the time it's going to be chalk. You're going to get like 70 probably 70 to 80% blowouts would be my expectation over the course of a bracket. And again, that's greatly like made much worse because of the AQ thing, the way they're going to seed it. It's not going to be seeded competitively, so blowouts are going to be that much more common. And it also means good teams are going to end up being playing each other early, and so that that you give this token seed to the a 2-loss Utah, right? That forces Alabama and Georgia, for example, last year they play in the semis, they don't play in the final because Georgia is not a top 4 team. I'm frustrated. I don't despise going to a 12-team playoff in principle. I really, really, really am not happy with the way that they're going to do it.
I don't like being basically gaslit by administration in having to pretend that winning the Pac-12, especially post realignment, when UCLA, USC, and Stanford and whoever else goes to the Big Ten, when winning the Pac-12 but losing to BYU and San Diego State, I have to pretend that team is better than Georgia. I don't like that. I don't like that I'm being asked to pretend that 3-loss MAC champion belongs in the playoffs at all. And I'm frustrated because I want that 3-loss MAC champion to play 8-4 Mississippi State and have a good bowl game. And I'm going to watch it in early December. Cody Hayes said something that a lot of people are saying that I kind of agreed with at first, but now I really disagree with now that I've thought about it. And he said that the 12-team playoff is going to encourage big-time matchups. And I'm assuming he's saying out-of-conference scheduling, because now that you maybe have a mulligan, your OOC scheduling will lead you to free yourself to play a really good team because you're not scared if you take a loss. I totally disagree with that, because what you're going to do is you're going to want to take your mulligan in conference on the way to the conference championship, but make sure you ensure a top 12 ranking. What's a good way to ensure a top 12 ranking? Sorry. Do what Michigan's doing this year. They opened with Colorado State today, who was 3-9 last year, who lost by 20 points to the Utah State team Alabama's up 55-0 on. That's the best team that Michigan plays out of conference this year. They've got 3 wins baked in, which means in a future 12-game or 12-team playoff scenario, you want as clean a record as possible. You're going to give yourself your mulligan in conference. If I don't win my conference, no big deal, as long as I have enough guaranteed wins, guaranteed home games, guaranteed games against crappy teams to ensure that these voters are going to put me in, because they're going to say, oh, you went 10-2 and you're a good brand name. You didn't do great in your conference, but you went 10-2. So let's put you in the playoffs. That's what's going to happen. You're going to have less big-time matchups because this incentivizes gaming the system to make sure you're in that top 12 even more, because that's actually easier than winning your conference.
Yeah, and people may say, well, but the teams at the top of the heap, they're going to want to play these games, right? Because then they're going to want to seed to be number 1 through number 4. Let me give you a quick note so you understand this. They're already playing those games. I am watching Notre Dame play Ohio State right now. Alabama is going to go play at Texas next week. Alabama is scheduled a home-and-home with Ohio State, which means Ohio State scheduled with Alabama. Those games are already on the books. The only thing that you would be looking is sort of the second-tier teams, and those are the teams that are not playing major out-of-conference games for all the reasons that Daniel just talked about, because they know they really want to make the playoff for a New Year's Six Bowl, and they don't want an extra loss. Those teams don't want to burn their mulligan losing to Alabama, right? Florida State doesn't want to open with Alabama if they feel like they're going to be in a turnaround program in 5 years. They want to be in a position where, maybe they drop 1 or 2 games in conference. They drop 2 games in conference, lose to Clemson as one of those 2, beat 3 cupcakes. They end the season 10-2. No, they got a pretty good shot to be top 12. If they play Alabama and they finish 9-3, not so good a shot. And so, I don't think people are going to at most, I don't think anything is going to change. I actually think there's an incentive for it to get worse. I don't think it really will, because I think people still want to try to play some sort of notable out-of-conference game for a variety of reasons. But I certainly don't think people are going to start scheduling 2 of them, right, because of this playoff structure. I just don't think that's going to happen. The only way that's going to happen is a separate independent initiative for, hey, let's all play 2 out-of-conference games against P5 teams. But just because of the 12-team playoff and some sort of seeding advantage, I don't buy it. I'm sorry, I just don't buy it. I don't buy the argument.
Yeah, and Eric, thank you for the super chat. Eric said he can see playoff expanding to 16 games and college football going back to 11 games a year. What do you think? I actually don't think that's the case. I think I think it should. I think if they're going to make these players play these games and, just take the toll on their body while they're also asking them to go to class and all this stuff, I think it's ridiculous that they're adding 2 more games. Like, think of Alabama, Ohio State 2020. If either one of those teams had to play another game after that one, they would have been a shell of themselves. And whoever beat them wouldn't have been the real champion because the real champion wasn't there. Half of their team was injured. Devonta Smith broke his finger. Mac Jones was banged up. Alabama was already and Ohio State was just in an infirmary ward. So, yeah, I think they should go back to games. But the problem is you go from 12 to 16. That's 4 more teams. That's 2 more games versus 60 games that you get to make money off of, sell tickets to. You got 2 games that you can sell tickets to and make money off of versus 60 games. And even if they're crappy teams or whatever, and they're only putting, 30,000 people in the seats, it's still part of TV packages. They're still selling those weekends, that sort of thing. And so I don't think that's going to happen. That's actually why they added the 12th game, because they were talking about playoffs and all of that, and they did the 12 games in the conference championships. They added those games instead of having it just take part in the season, because they realized when they looked at it on paper, it's 60, 65 games if you just add 1 more, even if it's a cupcake.